everybody, this is Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases, but also as time passes, I've been covering other cases such as the Staircase or OJ and many wrongful convictions of youth. I go over the documents, the photos, the videos, anything case related. So stay tuned because I have many more videos just like the one you're about to see. Hello, everybody. This is a very special, interview for me. I've always admired and respected this person who I'm talking to today, and as I do with all objective and conscientious investigators, and this guy has had my respect ever since I originally read his blog. Even though he ended up, I think, not being able to complete the chapter for episode 10, but besides that, and I know some people out there were a little bit peeved about that, but I mean, he's a busy guy. The guy I'm talking about is Steve Moore. But that blog was brilliant, and what really sets him apart for me is the fact that he's very objective and obviously non-biased, because he has no skin in the game, or as he puts it himself, he has no dog in the fight. But beyond that, he's just conscientious by nature. He goes by the book. It's, and as he tells you some of the things you're going to see him say here today about Brendan's interrogation and then Tom Fassbender, and we talk a little bit about his fellow agent at the FBI who's now also retired. But we talk about Greg McCrary, who is Zellner's expert on investigations. So he tells us a little bit about Greg McCrary and that sort of thing, and we talk a little bit about what Greg McCrary was talking about when he wrote his affidavit for Zellner about victimology being important, making sure you know the victim and you know that it's so important because it helps you figure out where she might have been in danger from, that people in her life that might have had cause to harm her or were showing signs of disturbing behavior or that sort of thing, right? That's what victimology is so important for, because it helps you find the people who had motive or cause, or were somehow driven to have ill will or to do something nasty to the victim. So we talk about those things. We talk about Brendan, like I said. We talk about Fassbender, a little bit about the Seventh Circuit, the control question, and so a lot of things. But I just got to say, Steve Moore has been somebody I respected for a long time, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him on the channel. I want all my subscribers to know he is a friend of the channel. One little disclaimer I want to give you all is, look, he has not made a decision on Stephen Avery. Okay? I know some of you may have qualms with people like that. But, look, just understand that he's still not, he basically, because the investigation is so bad, that he hasn't been able to actually say, yes, I do think he's guilty. Okay? He actually, honestly, is on the fence about it. And that tells you how bad this investigation is, because the evidence against Stephen is considerable. Now, when you look at it a little more critically, like most of us do, you see problems with it. But the fact of the matter is despite the fact that, there's a considerable amount of weight of evidence against Avery, but he's looked at some of it and he knows that there's questions, a lot of questions. He doesn't like the way that it was handled by Ken Kratz. There's a lot of things he has issues with, and so you're going to hear him say a few things in this video about the investigation. So what I want you all to understand is that even if Mr. Moore eventually comes down on the side of Stephen being guilty, I want you to still respect him. I want you to still think that his opinion is worthwhile, because it is. Now, it could be possible that he falls, on the side against Stephen Avery, and it ends up that more evidence comes out and he could possibly see it differently again. So, just remember, he's an objective point of view. He is a very highly qualified and skilled investigator. He's had many years at the FBI. Okay, many years at the FBI. He's a retired FBI agent, just like Greg McCrary is now, Zellner's expert about investigations, right? So please give him your respect. He's absolutely phenomenal. Other thing I wanted to talk about right before we get into the video here, folks, is that I'm obviously now wearing another of my signs of international support. So, for those of you who can't see it, here, let me just show you. It's a tie. It has like the Pink Panther there, dancing on a piano keyboard, basically. And so, this tie was sent to me by Mr. Capaldi. You know who I'm talking about. He's the Mad Scotsman over there. So, he's the one that originally, him and Mark came up with the idea for the Control Question t-shirt. So anyways, I'm wearing another symbol of the international support for Stephen and Brendan. And like I said, pretty cool. Got the Pink Panther dancing on little piano keys there. So it's a pretty nice tie. What do you guys think? Anyways, so to get into it, to get to the important thing here, and that's the fact that we're talking to a very, very well-seasoned, highly trained, very, very objective and very ethical. Let me stress that word, ethical investigator. So we're going to get into it, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve Moore, retired FBI agent. Hello, everybody. How are you today? We're here today on Cozy on Making a Murder, and it's a really special experience for me because I'm getting to talk to somebody who I have a lot of respect for, a very, an investigator with, spectacular credentials, who's going to give us some of his thoughts about Stephen and Brendan today. But before we get into that, I wanted to give everybody here a little bit of a background of him and some of the things that he's done and what he does continue to do even to this day. Some of you may recognize Steve Moore is his name, by the way, sorry. You may recognize him from a blog he did about MAM after the original season came out. Unfortunately, he didn't get to finish the 10th part of that, but I tell you what, the first 9 parts were just very informative. He's very objective. He looks at the evidence objectively. He's not really swayed by emotion or anything like that, and that's what I like. Really, one of the things I really like about him. So some of you that may recognize him, you may know that he was he did that blog back after the original season of MAM. He also actually flew over to Italy to help out with the Amanda Knox case, which I do hope you will speak a little bit about because I know a lot of my subscribers will be interested in that. He's often interviewed on CNN and other news agencies for his expertise in investigations and in law enforcement, conduct and that sort of stuff. So he's very well known. And the capper for it, folks, is he is a retired FBI agent. When it comes to knowing investigations, I think, an FBI investigator is probably about the tops you can get. And so that's why I'm so excited to have some of his opinions here today. So I'm going to give him a chance to talk about Amanda Knox and some of the things he's done in the past, so you guys can get to know him a little.
Great. Hey, thanks for having me on. And you're right, I never finished what I said I was going to do on MAM. And I apologize to everybody for not getting that done. There are a myriad of reasons for that, and they are significant reasons, not just because I was lazy or too busy. I wanted to come out with an opinion that I could take to my grave, and I don't have one yet. And I have thoughts and concerns, but I don't have the access to the information that I would like to have, that I had on the Knox case, that would let me put something down. And I've got to tell you that I do pro bono work for people who've been convicted, usually overseas, but sometimes in the U.S. And the first time I'm wrong is the last time I work a case, really, because my credibility is all I've got. So there are reasons that I haven't come out with an opinion that I haven't vetted to my satisfaction yet.
Sure, I absolutely understand. In fact, that's what I love about you, because you want to have all the facts. You're not jumping off half-cocked, and that's what's one of the things I admire about you.
Okay.
But just to talk a little bit about Amanda Knox, like what exactly were you doing over there? What exactly was your involvement on the Amanda?
Well, the Knox case came about because my wife Michelle kind kind of challenged me. You know, this case was going on, and she'd been arrested while I was in the FBI, and when her case went to trial, I was actually in charge, among other things, of the safety and protection of students overseas, for a major university, and that included a campus in Italy. And so obviously I watched that case pretty closely, and my opinion at the time, based on everything I had seen, was that she was guilty, which was a lesson to me, not to take half the evidence or just hear what one media says or the other side of the media says and take their opinion. So I got involved in the case, got involved in looking at it for Michelle, and took months, and came to the conclusion that not only was she not guilty, she couldn't have done the crime, and it couldn't have been an accident that she was wrongly convicted. And so through some involvement, some people heard that I had that opinion. I don't know how they heard that except for Michelle telling them. I got involved. I met the family, but not until I had gone on Good Morning America, the Today Show, and said she was innocent, and that was something I was willing to stake my life on. And so I was pretty much involved as an I believe I was an influencer of public opinion, because certainly the Italians weren't going to invite me into court to testify. I wasn't taking money. I had no dog in the fight. I didn't even know the family when I first came out and spoke about it. Never took a dime. And my belief was that my value was stating an opinion that was free, that was experienced, and that I held strongly. So that's what I did with the Knox case, and I like to think that it helped.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's really great. So you were just an influential opinion because people respected you so much, really.
They respect the badge and my experience, and I hope they come to respect me. But if nothing else, the badge and the experience will convince people.
Right. I think, well, obviously being, a retired FBI, you obviously had a long career and earned some respect in those, in those years. So stands the reason, I would think, right? So,
I hope.
So yeah. So I guess we'll go ahead and move into the first question here, and it has to do with Greg McCrary, which I understand you worked with him on one investigation, from what Michelle was telling me.
Yeah, at least one. He may have been involved in some other cases. Greg's an ex-agent also, and I have a lot of respect for his work. I've never sat across from him because our work is done through the internet, through phone calls, things like that. But he's extremely credible, I believe.
Right, I do too. I mean, in Zellner, just for everybody who's wondering who Greg McCrary is, he's Zellner's expert on investigations. And he was really big on pounding two things in his affidavit, or his affidavit that he gave. The first one was, and I was hoping you might expand on it a little bit, is he talked about the importance of victimology and getting to know every possible thing about the victim. When you think you got enough, keep digging because you need more, kind of attitude about victimology, and why that's important. And I was hoping you would expand on that whole idea. And then secondly, leading into what the pitfalls are of going too quickly from an evidence-based investigation to a suspect-based investigation.
Well, before you go to a suspect-based investigation, you better damn well have enough to take it to court, because once you stop going on evidence-based investigation, you better have it right, because you're no longer investigating, really. You're just proving. And so that's very dangerous. I'm a pilot also, and one of the things you do is you fly these instrument approaches, and you go all the way down until the very minimum, and you look up, and if you do it right and the clouds are high enough, you see the runway, and you go from instruments to visual, looking on the ground. If you go to instrument to visual and there's no runway there yet, you're going to crash the airplane. And so I consider evidence the instruments of an airplane. They don't lie to you. You follow them, and if you get down to the end of the approach and there's nothing there, we have to climb out and look again. And jumping to visual too soon will kill you, and jumping from evidence to a suspect too soon in an investigation will kill the investigation.
Certainly. Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. Kind of, you're flying blind without the evidence, essentially. I like that. That's good.
That's what it really is.
Right on. And then victimology, like, how important that is to make sure you're finding out everything about the victim. The reason why it was important here is because one thing that didn't seem to come out about Teresa during the trial and stuff is that she was being harassed by somebody by phone. Her
Right.
mentor, Tom Pierce, was talking about the fact that she had somebody calling her. I think I'm echoing somehow. But he had somebody calling her and harassing her, and we don't know who that is. The state, Kratz, no investigator ever bothered to take one step down that road. It's like,
right.
How do you not take one step down that road? How's that possible? But that's what came out in Greg McCrary's victimology about that should have been addressed. And
oh, of course it should have. Greg's absolutely right there. And victimology doesn't necessarily mean that you have to know everything about the victim themselves, because usually they're innocent targets of somebody. But you have to know what was going on in their life. You have to know everything that could have possibly made them victims, or indications that they were being targeted by anybody. And whether or not I come to a conclusion that Stephen is or is not guilty of this case, or did or did not do it, I can't in any way, shape, or form support the investigation or the manner of prosecution. And this case was probably one of the most poorly investigated cases I've had the misfortune to look at. That doesn't mean, in and of itself, absent this situation, it doesn't mean that a very poor investigation can't get the right person. But if it is, it's more luck than anything.
Right, right, luck. Yeah, certainly. Okay, yeah. So that was one thing I wanted to ask about McCrary. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about was Brennan's interrogation. I wanted to hear some of your thoughts about what investigators potentially did right, if anything, or much, and what...
They got his name right. Frequently, they got his name right. They called him Brendan.
Right, okay.
So you got to give them credit for that. They did some research.
Their tactics and some of the things they did in there.
Yeah. Listen, what they did to Brendan was... There's two things you can do when you meet with a potential suspect. You can interview them, and interviewing is a search for information, or you can interrogate them, which is a search for a confession. And they're usually mutually exclusive, because when you're trying to get a confession from somebody, the only information you're interested in getting from them is the stuff that you already decided that they need to tell you. So it's no longer an interview. In no way, shape, or form was anything that ever went on with Brendan, that I've seen at least, an interview. It was an interrogation. It was trying to get him to confess to something. And one of the things that you look for is culpable knowledge, things that can be verified. And I had a guy come into a school, machine gun some 5-year-old kids, and the next day we got him and he confessed to me. It took 8-9 hours. Do you know when I started corroborating his evidence? The first hour of the investigation. He said, I cut off the barrel of the machine gun so it would fit under my coat. I said, just a minute. I walked outside, got on the phone to the agents in Seattle, said, there's supposedly a barrel of a gun in a drum in his dad's workshop in Olympia, Washington. Go find it. And then I went back in. And so a confession without a corroboration is a nice story. And not only did they never really try to corroborate his Brendan's relating of facts, they kind of avoided it, and when they did try to corroborate it, it was like some elementary school kid was trying to corroborate it. They said, well, he did it, he must have done it, he said it. There was never any corroboration, and when he said things, they were ridiculous. These things, he said that things happened in that room which were impossible based on forensic evidence. So right then you say, thanks, Brendan, you lied to us, get out of here. And or you say, tell me the real story, or whatever you want to do. But these guys, the investigators didn't have some IQ deficit. Brendan may have, but they didn't, so they have no excuse for the fact that they couldn't come. They took a very stupid story and ran with it.
Yeah. I was going to say that when it comes to that confession, one of the things is, number one, that has come out is that the facts. It's been determined that the facts were mainly fed to Brendan.
Absolutely, they were, and I find that in almost every wrongful conviction / confession I've ever been involved with. And just for your viewers, edification here. After the 1980s, when DNA came out as an effective tool, something like 1,000 or 2,000 convicted rapists were found not to be the rapist. And in about 25% of those cases, there were false confessions, because you get to the point where you believe they've got me whether I did it or not. I better get the best deal I can. And so in all these confessions that I've seen, that I've worked with, they fed information. That the Amanda Knox false confession, which wasn't a confession, but they fed her information that they wanted back on paper. That's what they did with Brendan Dassey.
And I think that goes to displaying the fact that you're talking about with the lack of corroboration. When they're feeding it to him, it can't really be counted as corroboration then, can it? Because it was fed.
Yeah. How can you corroborate something? The way you corroborate it is only the killer would know this, or only the person involved would know this. Well, if they told him, then he didn't know it, or they prove he knew it.
And then the part that kills me is that when Brennan's with the Seventh Circuit en banc review, that was like the last part, and he'd already won twice, and suddenly those majority judges were Judge Hamilton's talking about how, well, didn't Brendan say she was stabbed and that they cut her hair and they did this and that and blah 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 blah. Well then nobody fed him those things, right? And it's like, Judge Hamilton, but how do you prove those
he's
things
been stabbed
happened?
in her haircut?
How do you prove those things ever happened?
Yeah. And let me just tell you this. Everybody says, oh, the police are horrible in this, and they are. But why do you think that they thought they could get away with this? Because they could. And they could get away with it because the district attorney, Ken Kratz's office, they would let them get away with it. And how did Kratz and his group think that they could get away with the crap that they pulled? Well, the judges would let them get away with it. In the FBI, if I were to bring some kind of crap case to the United States attorney, they would have laughed me out of the office, or worse. There would have been a call back to my supervisor before I got back, and he'd punch me when I walked in. And the reason they didn't do that, besides having some honor, I hope, is that the federal judiciary won't let you get away with it. They will not only throw your case out, but they will sanction you. They will do nasty things to you if you bring them crap. And while I disagree with the Supreme Court not granting cert on this case, you have to understand that all they're doing is saying that they're not granting cert because they didn't see that the previous court made any errors in their judgment. So I think I understand where they came from. But the problem remains that the judges in that area of the country are allowing this kind of crap to happen. And when the judges allow it, the district attorney decides he can do it, and then the police, they've got free reign.
That's why I'm so proud of Judge Wood and Judge Robner and Judge Williams for their, well, particularly Wood and Robner for their scathing dissents to the majority over there. I don't know if you know about this, but there's something about the interrogation of Brendan that really bothers me. I'm going to show you guys something right now. This is a shirt that my friend Paul Capaldi had made up, and it refers to the control question, which was made or that Tom Fassbender asks Brendan during the interrogation. And I wanted to kind of talk about this real quick with you, in that is it common for investigators to misunderstand the English language completely? Because when they ask,
besides me, no, I do, but most investigators don't.
But what he does is he asks Brendan about a fake fact. He makes it up. It's a completely fake fact. He says that Teresa had a tattoo on her stomach that she didn't have, and he asks Brendan about it. He goes, "Do you remember that?" And Brendan goes, I don't. And I think Tom Fassbender must have not been good with the wishy-washiness of that answer. And so what he did was he went a step further, and he said, "Brendan, do you disagree with me?" Because if he'd have stopped there, the control question would have been a success. Because he would have made up a fact, Brendan would have denied seeing it, it would have been a success. Control question success. But he goes one further and says, "Brendan, do you disagree with me?" At this point, it puts on display all of the mental conditioning that they'd been, subjecting him to the entire time. And as soon as he said, "Do you disagree with me?" you can see Brendan is immediately like, "Uh-oh, they're going to start telling me to be honest. They're going to start whatever, like they've been doing." And so he immediately goes, "No," basically saying, "No, I don't disagree with you," which basically means, "I agree with you that she had a tattoo that she didn't have." Right. And then, so the Seventh Circuit Court, the state of Wisconsin, and Tom Fassbender, anytime somebody puts a mic or a camera in front of his face, will tell everybody how the control question proves that Brendan was resisting, when it proves exactly the opposite. It proves exactly how easily he buckled when he was asked if he disagreed with Tom Fassbender. And the Seventh Circuit majority used it the same way in their decision to reinforce their decision that it was Brendan resisting. And it's driving me insane that like the English professors of the world aren't like jumping out going, "What are you guys talking about here?" Because it's ridiculous that it's getting interpreted that way. It's just a joke.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because they're making him say what they want to say. And the other thing is when you say, "Brendan, do you disagree with me?" that's almost a threat. It's like your father coming in and saying, "Oh, do we have a disagreement here?" "No, sir, no, sir." I mean, it's just foolishness. He would go any direction they wanted him to go.
Right. So that'll bring me to my final question. And this one also has to do with Fassbender in regards to Brendan. Recently, or well, maybe not so recently, about a year ago, they did a Dateline called "Return to Manitowoc," and it was about
the what? I'm sorry.
It was they did a Dateline, the crime show on I think NBC or which.
Oh yeah, I've been on it.
It was called cool, and it was called "Return to Manitowoc," basically. So it was about the Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey cases. And during that show, Tom Fassbender says at one point when he's being interviewed, he says, they're asking him about Brendan. He goes, "I don't assess IQs." Now, this statement to me just sets me off in a couple of different ways. Number one, if you're an investigator, aren't you the type of person that needs to be able to size people up pretty quick because you're walking onto a scene and you're trying to, figure out what's going on and you want to see if there's any shady or suspicious characters? I mean, don't you have to have that ability? And then beyond that, wait a second, Tom, didn't you spend an entire weekend with Brendan? More than just one day? I mean, you spent the entire weekend with him. Are you that woefully inept at your job that you didn't see the clear signs that this kid wasn't, on the same level as maybe the rest of his 16-year-old counterparts? And so that "I don't assess IQs" thing just sets me off, kind of.
Help me again. How old was Brendan at the time exactly?
16. He was 16 years old at the time.
That's okay. I was thinking 16 or 17. Here's the deal. First of all, the FBI would never go in and interview a 16-year-old without getting it cleared with the United States Attorney's Office, and they would put certain restrictions, certain certain things would be put in play that would guarantee that you wouldn't lose your case over interviewing a 16-year-old, or as I thought, a 17-year-old, without their parents or a lawyer involved. I cannot imagine the FBI interviewing a juvenile without the parent or the parent or a lawyer being present. If I tried that, the United States attorney would have my butt. That's just ridiculous. Thank you. And see, that's the thing. When you go into a situation, and I have been on these things, I had one guy. Let me just give you an example. I had a guy who was supplying guns to people who were using them to hurt people intentionally. He supplied the machine gun to the guy who shot the kids. Okay, I went up and I spent 10 hours with him in one day. Okay, and got a confession out of him. At the end of the day, the United States attorneys would not allow that confession to go into court because they felt that my presence with him for 10 hours might have overcome his
overbore his will.
Overbore his will, even though I was able to corroborate everything he said.
I understand. In my opinion, the law and order type of guy I am, the corroboration should have canceled out any concern about the length. But
well, then you understand where I was. I was fit to be tied. However, what I'm saying here is during the time, during 10 hours, I did come up with kind of an idea of what kind of person this was. And I felt that they had some emotional deficiencies. You know, amazing. A person who would supply a machine gun that he knew was going to be used to kill someone has emotional deficiencies. That in and of itself isn't a defense. But had I felt that he was in some way intellectually impaired, I would have done what I did before. I would have left the room, called up the United States attorney, and say, you know what? I think we got a problem here. This guy may not have the intellect to give a knowing confession. That wasn't the case in my case, but it might have been the case with Fassbender's interrogation. And while Fassbender, I get what he says, you're not there to assess IQ, but at a certain point, if you've got a question about it, you better get it squared away because you could lose your case. Maybe not in Wisconsin, but where I worked, you could lose your case very easily over that. And so I think that's what I would be concerned about.
Right. Yeah. It's with Brendan and I don't know, Fassbender just bugs me so much. I mean, the fact feeding, the just to me the psychological tactics that they use on Brendan, who's just kind of defenseless, and he's not really able to defend himself that way. I'll tell you what, something you were just saying about the way you would need to call the United States Attorney's Office and stuff like that. It bothers me that the states don't have a similar kind of setup to that. Because
well, they do. He would have picked up the phone and called Kratz. What do you think Kratz would have told him?
So what it comes down to then is the DA's offices in the states just aren't as diligent about that as the U.S. District Attorney's Office.
I don't want to say in every state or in every locality, but I can tell you pretty carefully that pretty truthfully that in this particular region of this particular state, there were no grown-ups. It was run by the kids, and that's the issue. And
I want to say that every state's that bad. So I want to.
I've worked with some good ones. I've worked with some bad ones. I've recommended prosecution for police officers. The FBI investigates police officers. As much as I love law enforcement, I think the best way to love law enforcement is to keep them honest and gain the people's trust and throw out the bad ones.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
So I think there's some serious problems here, but yeah, there's no reason not to have called in on this. And while I get what Fassbender says, it's not a good enough excuse for me. And here's the other thing that I'd like to explain to the viewers. A good interrogation or good interview and a bad interview might appear the same to most people, because even in a good interview, there's a point at which, I would switch over and say, I've got enough. I've got enough. It could only be this guy. Where I switch over and I start using tactics to convince them that it is the best thing for them and the people of the community for them to confess. I've never had to threaten somebody. But I have put pressure on people and gotten confessions that were corroborated. But and that, by the way, when you get a corroborated confession and somebody goes away for a long time, when you come home that day and you just realize that the person you were talking across the table from for days is going to lose everything, it helps you sleep at night, because you wake up in the middle of the night saying, you're sure now, you're sure, you did it right. Any cop who doesn't wake up in the middle of the night afraid after a conviction that they didn't do everything just right is not really worth it, because then where's your empathy? There's, I don't know how Fassbender lives with himself unless he's convinced himself through ignorance that he got the right guy. And if he thinks he's got the right guy, he's just shouldn't be doing what he's doing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I think I agree with you. I mean, I don't know. Tom Fassbender kind of bugs me more than Ken Kratz bugs me. Well, maybe they're on the same level. But I see when he talks about Brendan the way he does, he seems to have no remorse. It just bothers me. And I see him as being the responsible party more than I do Wiegert.
Right.
So it's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Good talking to you.
And I do hope to speak to you more in the future. I was telling Michelle, by the way, that we found a new feature on YouTube here where we're able to do what's called a hangout. I'm able to go live and do a hangout. If you are interested in jumping in whenever you may, if I'm live ever and you want to jump in one time, you can just join in. I can add you to it, and you can actually be on the screen with us, a couple other people, and we can talk in real time. I've actually recently had a defense attorney from Texas named Travis Williamson who's kind of joined in, and he's been giving us a lot of the legal side of things. I have a forensic guy, a guy who does a lot of DNA and testing and stuff in a laboratory here nearby up in San Francisco. He's able to kind of give us some of that side of things and how that stuff should work and that sort of thing. And so it's the community is getting built with people who are very knowledgeable in these things and in investigations or in the DNA process or in the court process. And I would love to have you as part of the community whenever you're willing to come on. And
appreciate it. I'm continuing to look at this and delve into it more. I've just got so much going on. I just have to make sure that I am comfortable with my conclusions. But the fact that McCrary's involved with Zellner, makes me think, because I know McCrary's not for sale. So if he believes it, that really helps.
Right. I can absolutely forward some things to Michelle for you, some of the most recent filings by Zellner and stuff, if you guys want to go ahead and go over them.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. And again, there's just some things I, as an investigator, have to get past, and I'm going to be looking at them. So
my subscribers to know, look, don't understand that he's objective. He's objective. Okay?
Yeah.
I know some people do have some trouble understanding that, but he's going to look at it and he's going to tell you what it looks like to him honestly with all of his experience. So don't get upset if he says something that you don't necessarily like. He's probably going to say something else that you will like.
Your viewers are probably much more in the weeds than I am with this case right now. I have not been able to give it the look that it needs for me to come up with an educated decision. And so when I get that, who knows where it'll go.
And I would like to just say to everybody, if he ends up coming down with an opinion that he kind of does think Steve's guilty, don't hate him, folks. We still like him. He's still got a lot of integrity. And, so just, we like Steve. We want Steve to be a friend of the channel. So I just want to say that to my subscribers.
Well, thanks. And I will tell you one thing that I will promise you. I will never say what I don't believe. And there's no money changing hands here. I've got no dog in the fight. Brendan Dassey, I've seen enough. Now I just need to see the rest for the other people.
Right. Okay. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to doing this again with you, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. So that wraps up my interview with Steve Moore, retired FBI investigator. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to him. He's just, a very sensible guy. He's easy to talk to and really nice guy. I was really impressed with him. I'm very happy to call him a friend of the channel. And it's just, I hope he will continue to come on the channel. Because I kind of let him know what the Google Hangout was, and that he could eventually join into the Google Hangout if he ever wanted to share some ideas with us if he ever wanted to. And I wanted to make sure that he knew that door was open, because, I'd love to have a quality investigator, somebody with ethics and a heck of a lot of experience, that can occasionally pop in here on the channel as a friend of the channel and enlighten everybody as to the way investigations should be run. I'm kind of affectionately going to be calling him, similar to the way that I say Professors Drizzen and Nyrider. Because I just like to call, especially Professor Drizzen, I always like to call him Professor Drizzen. It's a term of endearment. And so I'm probably going to have now a similar term of endearment for Mr. Moore here, and that's going to be Instructor in Investigations Moore. So, or Investigations Instructor Moore. So I just want everybody to know he's a friend of the channel. I know some of you may have had issue with him not finishing that blog back in the days, but listen, he's really busy. He's really super busy. And at that time, when he was finishing up that blog, he got approached by several different news organizations to cover something. And he was also becoming CNN's, like law enforcement and investigation, like panelist on their show, to where he's, so he's like a kind of like a consistent player on that show, basically. And he just got really busy. And so please forgive him. Those of you that were a little upset with him back then, just please forgive him. He's really a good guy, honest guy, straight shooter, and just a phenomenal wealth of information when it comes to investigations. So I just always want him to feel comfortable here, and so just wanted to express that to everybody. This was for me, a very, very big moment. I think hearing what an FBI agent, a retired FBI agent, somebody who's very, very knowledgeable and skilled when it comes to investigations, and hearing their take on what he thinks about the investigation, loosely there, and then in particular to Tom Fassbender. He had some pretty specific criticisms of Tom Fassbender. He even went as far as to say that if Tom Fassbender couldn't figure out what he was dealing with Brendan, after that much amount of time with Brendan, the entire weekend and stuff, then he's not very good at his job, and he shouldn't have been doing it. I don't think he means that, and I don't think he meant that mean. I don't think Steve Moore meant that in any way to be mean. I think he just was stating it matter-of-factly that if he could not recognize the problems that were there with Brendan, then he was willfully ignoring it, or he's just really bad at his job. Yeah. The other thing that he was talking about was the fact that corroboration, and he was talking about that what he would have had to have with when he did, like when he was speaking about how interrogations that he did, how he got the guy that shot up the 5-year-olds, but then when he was going after the guy that supplied the guns, or the gun to that guy who shot up that elementary school and killed a bunch of 5-year-old children, right? This is horrific, right? Okay, but when he interrogated the guy who had provided the machine gun to the guy who actually did the shooting, he got the confession from the guy, but because it took 11 hours, the U.S. District Attorney's Office basically said, no, we don't want to go with this. We don't want to go with this because this may not hold up in court. You know? They are very conscientious about what they're willing to use and not willing to use. And what they were basically saying is that they felt Steve may have inadvertently overbore the guy's will after 11 hours. You know, basically 11 hours straight. That was the way that the U.S. District Attorneys reasoned on it. You heard how him and I were talking about it. I truly feel the way that I said. If there was corroboration, if the guy was giving him verifiable corroborative information during that 11 hours, I kind of think that should outweigh the length of time that the interrogation was. Personally, that's the way I feel, because for me, the corroborating information is really the important thing. But the U.S. District Attorney's Office has certain rules, but these DA's office, well, we're gonna, as I misspoke in the video, and mistakenly almost included the entire United States. But as Steve points out, in that very particular area of Wisconsin, the DA's office isn't as conscientious as the U.S. District Attorney's Office. They are a little more, hot and loose, or whatever, loose and ready with the rules, basically. So it's interesting stuff. I think it's something for everybody to think about, with all the stuff that Zellner's turning up, and then you hear an experienced investigator like Steve Moore here, retired FBI agent, who's saying he's not even, he can't make a decision. The case is such a mess. He can't make a decision, that's another thing about this, right? Another thing of why it's such a bad thing that this investigation was so poor is because it makes it hard for people, even people like Steve Moore, to be able to look through it and decipher it and to have any kind of confidence in the conviction that was reached here. It's not possible, and that's what Steve's telling you in this video. This investigation was so poor that it's impossible to tell, but he also offers the disclaimer that just because the investigation's poor doesn't mean they didn't get it right. That's a fair statement. But he does add he does add the little thing about saying, but if it is right, it's mostly luck. And we don't want to be trying to convict people on luck. That's not what our criminal justice system isn't about luck and basing things on luck. So, I thought this was a tremendously interesting interview, folks. I hope everybody liked it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.